Hi, I'm Jared, and today I'll be telling you about Fathers and Crows, this big hefty tome by William T. Vollmann. First, I'll give some overall reactions to the book itself. Then I'll tell you a bit about some of the main characters of the book, sort of sketch them out. And then finally, I'll share a few short excerpts from the book to give you a flavor of some of my favorite passages. Fathers and Crows was published in 1992 by Penguin Books. As you can see, it's a big boy. It's about 900 pages worth of text, plus another 100 pages of glossaries, endnotes, and references. This is typical of a William T. Vollmann work. So to start off, this book is the second episode in Vollmann's Seven Dreams, a book of North American landscapes, which is a 7-book series dealing primarily with historical fiction topics around the settling of North America. The first episode, The Ice Shirt, deals with encounters between Norse Icelandic migrants and native communities. All of the Seven Dreams books, including Fathers and Crows, are focused, like I said, on a topic that I return to time and time again in my reading. That is the ongoing interaction in North America between European colonizers and native communities. This is something I enjoy reading about, primarily from a nonfiction perspective, but I do enjoy books like this that put a fictional spin on these types of events and themes. Why do I keep coming back to this topic? Because the world we live in today was directly shaped by this varied series of encounters between the European colonizers and the native communities that they encountered and eventually, dominated in various ways. My view, in fact, is that you can't understand your place as a resident of North America, of the North American continent, without attempting to grasp the reality of these human and cultural touch points that happened from up to 1,000 years ago in the case of the Ice Shirt and the encounters between the Norse and the residents of Canada, up until today, basically. So when you're thinking about this set of interactions, there's an almost infinite number of narrative threads that can be explored when you look at the centuries of exchange, conflict, and domination that characterize the history of European imperium in North America. The two threads that Vollmann traces in Fathers and Crows and in the other works of the Seven Dreams series are sort of twofold. One is the relationship between people and their belief systems, and the second is the relationship between people and their environment. Okay, these are themes that are heavily explored through the storylines and the characters and the events of this book and others of the books in the Seven Dreams series. So over the course of almost 900 pages, like I said, Vollmann considers these threads by crafting a narrative of historical fiction. So this work, Fathers and Crows, like all the other Seven Dreams books, is deeply researched and is largely, in this case, based on the first-hand accounts of Jesuit missionaries in New France, what is today Quebec, during the 16th and 17th centuries, when France was making its first entrees into the North American continent by settling what they called New France, what we today know as Quebec. Put simply, Fathers and Crows is the story of the early colonization of Canada by the French and of Catholic missionaries' attempts to convert native communities to Christianity. So like I said, there are these big themes and questions that Vollmann is wrestling with through the text. The questions that he's asking throughout the narrative as a whole are really interesting, I think, and they're complicated questions. Here are a few that I think he sort of wrestles with through the course of Fathers and Crows. One, how does belief form our relationship with the world around us and to history? Two, what does it mean to actively live out one's beliefs or to seek to change another's beliefs? Okay. Three, how do the natural and the built environments around us shape our lives and our communities? And then four, do we fully understand the way that our cultures enchant the natural world? Meaning, do we fully have an appreciation of how our beliefs and our ideologies inform the way that we see actions and life happening in the natural world around us. Okay, big questions, tough to wrestle with, but Vollmann does a good job of that in the book. So in Fathers and Crows, to kind of get a little bit more into the narrative itself, the St. Lawrence River, also known as the Fleuve Saint-Laurent in French, also known as the Stream of Time, is a major motif, and it acts as a metaphor for the characters' lives and for the events that the novel depicts. Also, for their beliefs, for their practices, and for the overall march of history. Likewise, I would compare this entire book to a deep, wide river, just like the Fleuve Saint-Laurent. It's immersive, it's propulsive, it is deliberate, and it is sometimes ineffable, but it's always moving in a clear direction. That's one of the real strengths of the book that I found, is that the language, the characters, the details, and the narrative structure all serve to sort of pull you in and keep you moving forward. It never, while it's a huge book and while it is at times dense, there's a lot going on, there's a lot of words on every page, it never really feels like a slog. You're so often moving from scene to scene and event to event and character to character that you do feel like you're being pulled forward in, as if you were immersed in a massive river. So the book does something really important, which I often crave as a reader of mostly, like I said, nonfiction works of history. It restores the very human aspects of complexity, ambiguity, fear, messiness, passion, violence, belief, to a historical narrative that would otherwise remain sort of inscrutable and impersonal, right? There's always a gap between the people, places, and events in a history book and the lived reality of the real life people who experienced it. That's just, part and parcel of learning about history. Fathers and Crows, by contrast, is a pretty astounding example of how that gap can be filled by literary ingenuity. And that's kind of one of the reasons that I feel so strongly about this book and why I really enjoyed it. So next, I want to mention some of the prominent characters in Fathers and Crows. The book, like I said, almost 900 pages long, so as you can imagine, there are tons of characters who play a role in the narrative. But there are really only 3 who could be called sort of the main characters of the whole book. One is Born Under Water, who is a Native woman, the daughter of a Micmac mother and a French father. 2, Samuel de Champlain, the founder of the French settlement of Quebec. He's a pretty famous historical figure. And 3, Père Jean de Breuff, a Jesuit priest and missionary who is a saint and martyr in the Catholic Church. So Born Under Water, to start with her, is a pretty fascinating character. And Fathers and Crows could actually pretty accurately be described as her story. Early on in the book, her mother, born swimming, has a vision of the French and Jesuit arrival in Micmac territory in the eastern part of what is now Canada, and it then is later raped by the son of a French colonial captain. So she sort of arises out of this very early, very violent encounter between the French and the Micmac people in eastern North America. Her life, as told throughout the narrative, traces the gradual French incursion into the interior of North America and the Great Lakes region, and the increasingly brazen efforts by the French Jesuits to convert Native communities to Catholicism. She herself, Born Under Water, is a bit of a misfit and an outcast owing to her mixed parentage, her hard-headed nature, and also her ability to see ahead into the future. So she sort of has this clairvoyant ability in the novel. In many ways, Fathers and Crows is the story of the Jesuits' attempt to convince Born Under Water herself to relinquish her beliefs and to adopt Christianity. That is a pretty direct narrative through line across the hundreds of pages of the book. Born Under Water, though, is not a classic literary heroine, but she is a character that it's easy to latch onto as a reader. She doesn't have those typical sort of, hero attributes, but she is the through line of the narrative, and I found myself kind of perking up whenever she resurfaced on the page, because she kind of comes in and out across the chapters and across the storyline. So that's Born Underwater. The second character, like I said, is Samuel de Champlain. Champlain is a famous historical figure. At this point, he's a part of history and social studies curriculum for kids all across North America, probably in France too, I don't know. He has a big lake named after him, in addition to towns, universities, other geographic features, etc. He's just part of the landscape now. He's a bold name in the history books, especially in the history of Canada and the Great Lakes. Vollmann does a great job, though, of making Champlain truly human, with all the faults, weaknesses, and complexities that come along with that. In the book, Champlain exhibits this combination of imperial hubris and consuming self-doubt that seems like it would be contradictory, but actually is kind of endearing and at times comical. I kind of thought that Champlain was in some ways the comic relief in the book, if that makes sense. He fervently desires to be governor of Quebec, to convert the native communities to Christianity, to find the fabled passage, the Northwest Passage to China, and to gain favor of the French royal court and of the French aristocracy. But he never quite achieves any of those goals. He does not really gain the power that he so fervently desires in New France. He never finds the passage to the east because it didn't exist. He's still seen as an outsider and a non-aristocrat by the French elites, and the missionaries are consistently and constantly hampered by native resistance and intercommunal conflict in their efforts to convert them. So why I think that's important is because when you're writing about an imperial explorer or a colonizer or a conqueror, it's easy to fall into the sort of Western hero narrative. And Vollmann avoids that simply by offering up Champlain as he truly was. That was, he was a talented seafarer, he was a talented, map maker, but he exhibited all the foibles and follies of his cultural milieu at the time, right? So I think by taking this sort of clear-eyed picture and presenting him as a real, flawed human, it brings a lot of depth to the character. And Champlain was definitely one of my favorite characters of the book. So the final character I want to touch on is Père Jean de Breuff. He is the core of the final chunk of the book, which dives deep into the Jesuit efforts to proselytize Catholicism amongst the Montagnais, the Huron, the Algonquin, and Iroquois communities of Eastern North America. As befitting a man of the cloth, Breuff is a fervent believer in the righteousness of his beliefs and his mission and his actions. He truly does care passionately about the immortal souls of the people he is trying to convert, for better or for worse. Like Champlain, Breuff is a real historical figure. He is memorialized in statues in Canada, in paintings, and he was made a saint by the Catholic Church in 1930 because of his exploits in Canada back in the 1600s. It's not much of a spoiler to mention that Breuff is also considered a martyr by the Catholic Church, meaning he was killed due to his beliefs and his actions on behalf of his religion. Vollmann, introduces this on like page 50 out of 900, and if you Google Breuff and you look at his Wikipedia page, you can find out exactly how he was martyred. So this episode, the end of his life, his ritual killing by those he was trying to convert, is described in great detail in the book, and for good reason. The crown of martyrdom was seen by Breuff and the rest of his Jesuit comrades as the ultimate fulfillment, the ultimate goal of their life on earth. Convert as many souls to Christianity as you can until it literally kills you. That they saw that as their whole purpose in life, and that's kind of one of the main tensions or the main themes in the book, is this constant striving for martyrdom, for the crown of martyrdom. So Père Breuff's faith journey, the inexorable pull towards martyrdom, provides the book with a great deal of its narrative momentum, like I said. Throughout the book, Breuff crosses paths repeatedly with Born Underwater, and it is their relationship that propels Fathers and Crows towards its conclusion. They meet up, they encounter each other probably at the halfway mark of the book, and then their kind of repeated encounters and getting to know one another and kind of their suspicion of each other really kind of propels the character narrative forward. And to avoid giving too much away in terms of the book, I'll leave it at that. So next, and to wrap things up, I'd like to share a few short excerpts from the book that I think give a great example of how Vollmann writes, how he brings the environment to life, and how the book kind of immerses the reader. So the first is a description from early on in the book of the Jesuit order, also known as the Black Gowns, due to their black garb. So, here we go. What were they really, these men? They mortified themselves in secret. They were lovers of Jesus. Of course, other orders could say the same. But unlike their rivals, the Grey Gowns, the Recollects, our Jesuits knew how to navigate the stream of time. The watery way they chose to walk was cataracted, but more than one came triumphant to its end, where the crown of pain and death fell more heavily still upon the composed, burning face that did not scream, but rejoiced in its own sacrifice. In the painting of the Saints Martyrs Canadiens at their shrine, we see 8 of them on a cloud. All but 2 wear the accustomed black robes that stretch down to their ankles, the hats with strange ridges, the collars with their 2 narrow rectangular tabs, white-bordered, gray inside, as if to suggest the beleaguerment of the Recollects. Angels swim above them with the loving curiosity reputed to be shown by mermaids toward drowned sailors, and the initials of the Society of Jesus glow in the sun's heart. The halos of those who kneel shine more fervently than the ones of the standing martyrs, who are perhaps shy, for they have ranged themselves in the back row of this group portrait. Folds of black fall from them like the striations of cliffs. They clasp their hands or they make the sign of the cross. They gaze raptly in every direction. In this company we find Père Jogues, tomahawked, 1646, Père Daniel, shot, 1648, Père Jean de Brébeuf, roasted, 1649, and so many others. We do not find Père Biard or Père Massé. Why? Because they were not put to death by enemies of the word. That was the crown. That was what the Black Gowns longed for. That was their pride. What faith? To embrace the fire and love it. To kiss the rotting face. Okay, so the second passage is sort of a description of that brings the cold and the dark of a winter's night in Canada to life. The moonlit shadows of tree claws were very distinct, being both curled and sharp. Various darknesses lay fantastically coagulated upon the snow, black, silver, and gray. It was very cold. The chill sank into his knees like grease as he stood waiting, peering down a snowy hill of gruesome darkness. The Rivière had not frozen yet. He could hear it roaring. Despite its loudness, the sound came to him as sadly and distantly as some devil's imprecations. His ears ached with cold. The trees about him were very glossy, like the frozen veins or tendons of night's hands. Yes, night, or death, whom the Iroquois call him whose face is darkness. Okay, the next passage captures yet another onset of epidemic disease brought to the Huron people courtesy of the French. That winter, the snow sped down on cloudy days and sunny days and days when the sky was marbled white and Hudson blue, days when the mild cold made fingers prickle with pleasurable numbness and small birds sang while the tree horizon grayly blurred itself with snow which cascaded like an unnumbered chute or rapid in the stream of time. No matter how good the map, after all, no course can be charted down to the last foam fleck or snowfleck. As many as were the snowflakes, still greater was the number of those who perished of disease. Okay, the fourth is a description of present-day Montreal, to give you a sense of how Vollmann weaves the past and present together in the narrative. This is something he does. He serves as the narrator, William the Blind, and he kind of jumps back and forth, but in very limited and targeted ways. It's not throughout, it's not confusingly done, but he does provide these descriptions of present-day Montreal. Just across the Pont Mercier from her bones, it was a summer Sunday on St. Catherine Street. The churches were swollen, spired pods whose seeds were old people praying in dark pews. Cyclists glided and strained, following the painted lanes reserved for them, swimming through shoulder heat, neck heat. Gasping trees opened their leaves to the fullest, drinking light. People boiled past like sidewalk bubbles. White cottonwood seeds streamed down like manna through the luminous air. A greenish steeple rose about the trees, ripe with stone crosses. Every chapel and basilica bore its load of cross fruit. Light filled the interstices of every church railing, the spaces between all church arches. Okay, and the final passage describes Père Breuff as he travels down the Fleuve Saint-Laurent for the final time towards the end of the book. So throughout the narrative, Breuff spends a few years with the Huron people, then he'll come back to the French settlements. This is his final journey into the native community, the native territory along the St. Lawrence River. He ascended the Fleuve Saint-Laurent beyond the flowering wall of green darkness. He saw again the pines 100 pieds in height, the tremendous corpses of trees which had surely fallen before the deluge, and he passed into the forest heart once more. There is a special place in the stream of time where salt water becomes fresh. We have passed that place. There is another place where water becomes fire. We have passed that place. What next? Only the crown. Now here was the Sweetwater Sea, brownish blue and hazy, with islands of yellow-green and streaming lines of shade continually altering it. Well, that's the last passage that I wanted to share from Fathers and Crows. In summary, Fathers and Crows, great book. If you are into historical fiction, if you're a fan of William T. Vollmann and these sort of maximalist writers, if you're a fan of the encounters between European colonialists and native communities in North America, or if you're just looking for a really immersive, really engaging book to totally dive into for weeks at a time, because it's going to take you a long time to read this, I do recommend Fathers and Crows. You can get it online in a lot of different places. It's harder to find in bookstores. If you were to walk into a bookstore, they probably wouldn't have it, but I do recommend it. Pick it up. I'm going to be reading the rest of the Vollmann Seven Dreams series over, I don't know, the course of the next few months or years. So the next one I will be posting a review of before too long, hopefully, and hope to enjoy it just as much as I enjoyed Fathers and Crows. So go out and get it, and thank you for watching.